I'm delighted to welcome, and I'm very grateful as well. I know how valuable people's time is to join me, Daniel Fellows, the General Manager of Diversio EU and UK, alongside Sakina Reid, our Chief Operating Officer of Diversio EDU. For today's UK webinar, the culture of compliance. It's more than just a tick box. For those of you who might be meeting Diversio for the first time, Diversio is a people, culture, and inclusion analytics platform and training and consultancy company. Companies use Diversio to make critical business decisions powered by our ethical AI for the deepest understanding of any team, covering people, culture, and also delivering world-class training, educational programs, either in person or online. We launched in 2019 in Canada, and now we work in over 51 countries globally. During our live and on-demand webinar, the agenda will balance education, practical guidance, and engagement, making it highly relevant for HR professionals and business leaders. In the session, here's what we're going to be exploring. The compliance trap, understanding the basics, getting us all on that same level of understanding. Moving beyond compliance to build an inclusive culture, the role of HR and leadership in cultural transformation, culture versus compliance, and also towards the end, we'll have a much more interactive experience with up to 10 to 15 minutes Q&A to tackle any specific questions you've got or anything that really piques your interest during the session. Sakina, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks so much, Daniel. And thanks for starting us off as I dealt with technical challenges.
It wouldn't be a meeting or a webinar if there wasn't at least one or two technical challenges, I think. Okay, let's steam right ahead.
Awesome. So, I want to talk a little bit right off the very beginning about compliance. Apurva, if you could move us in, and we will jump into what compliance is exactly and why it's critical for any organization, while recognizing it's not the be all and end all. So compliance, very simply put, means following the laws or the regulations, and that also includes your internal policies to operate your organization legally and ethically. And the reasons why compliance is essential are because it ensures that you stay out of trouble with the law, and it also ensures that you have a safe culture, reducing the risk of lawsuits, financial penalties, and ultimately reputational damage. It helps you in creating policies that create that structure and fairness in a workplace so that employees can feel protected from discrimination, harassment, and unethical practices while fostering some of that trust and engagement. But it also sets the baseline for ethical decision making, including corporate social responsibility and long-term business sustainability, enabling organizations to build that culture of integrity and inclusion.
Wow.
So, Daniel.
It sounds like compliance. Well, I think we all know that compliance is the foundation of any workplace, as you just said, ensuring fairness, safety, and accountability. But isn't the challenge for organizations that compliance is, I think of compliance, I think complexity. And then if you overlay that with varying across regions, where do you begin?
Absolutely. And it's so funny you say that because I actually have some examples from Canada and the US, and I'm really hoping that you can step in and cover off the UK stuff. Purva, if you could just jump to the next slide. Canada has a bit of complexity because we have employment laws on two different levels. So federally regulated industries like banking and telecom and communications are covered by federal laws, but most organizations are covered provincially. And what's super fun here in Canada is each provincial or territory, each province or territory has different employment standards. So I'm just going to give you one example, and that's overtime rules. So I'm in Alberta, and when I moved here from Ontario, I was surprised to learn that the rules were different. So overtime applies after either 8 hours in a day, so as soon as you work 9 hours, or 44 hours in a work week, whichever works out better for the employee. Similarly, in British Columbia, overtime applies after 8 hours a day or 40 hours in a work week. And then in Ontario, overtime applies after 44 hours in a week with no daily threshold. So if you're an organization like Diversio that has employees in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver, you have to track different overtime rules and then adjust payroll accordingly. So that's super fun. And then in the US, it's somewhat similar because they have both a federal and a state level. But employment laws at the federal level sort of set the baseline. And then you have state or municipal laws that can strengthen or even in some cases override these regulations. So one example of that is the Family and Medical Leave Act is the federal law. But states like California also have state mandated paid family leave. Texas, on the other hand, follows only the federal, which provides unpaid but job protected leave. So if a US employer has employees in both California and Texas, they have two very different approaches to family leave. And can you imagine two people having a baby at the same time with two different policies to operate under? Daniel, in the UK, what does compliance look like over there?
It's a lot smaller, I would say, obviously, the size of the country. I think the UK has got a more centralized employment law framework, but we also obviously exist with devolved governments in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, which obviously influence specific policies. Just some examples. Public holidays differ across regions. When I researched this, I was amazed to learn that England and Wales, we have 8 bank holidays per year, which is great. In Scotland, there are 9 bank holidays, including an extra day just after the New Year, January the 2nd, and local holidays like Glasgow Fair Monday. Just to your point with the example in Alberta, a company operating in London and Edinburgh must decide whether to harmonise holidays across locations or allow for more regional local flexibility.
I think between us, we've just highlighted that there's complexity operating in just one country, and this obviously gets way more complicated the more countries an organization operates in.
Yeah, I think we need the old Diversio compliance matrix, don't we?
Right?
I think our Poover is sharing that in the chat, which is incredibly valuable resource. But yeah, I think the sort of key takeaways is that compliance and culture must work together. I think people can think they're in different parts of the business, different floors, completely separate, but actually they really need to be integrated in their approach. But really, compliance does hugely vary by location, requiring businesses to adapt policies while maintaining a unified culture. Laws change frequently, particularly in the UK at the moment. We've got some new laws coming in April. That's an ongoing challenge and something Diversio is always very much aware of. And I think we're going to cover this a little bit later, but thriving workplaces where we spend 8-10 hours a day, 5 days a week, it needs to go beyond legal requirements. It needs to really foster engagement, inclusion, and trust. Trust is really, really important for long-term success. Given this, we can use the word again, complexity, why should organizations not just spend all their time focusing on the legal compliance aspects?
Great question, Daniel. Let's jump to the next slide. And I think actually what we just spoke about speaks a little bit to why organizations can't just be compliant. How do you manage those employees in London and Edinburgh and Glasgow and maintain a workplace that feels fair if different people in different locations get different paid days off, different number of paid days off? So compliance doesn't exactly inspire or engage employees. Following the law, it's necessary, but it doesn't create that purpose, belonging, or engagement. So while you have to meet legal standards, it can still fail to provide an equitable or fair work environment. Additionally, when you take that tick the box compliance approach, nothing makes your employees feel less like giving you that extra effort than hearing your employer say, "We follow the law, so we aren't doing anything wrong." It's like, okay, so you're not doing anything wrong, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're hearing and valuing and allowing us to speak up and drive change. And if that trust isn't there, then you may have some missed opportunities around innovation and that real psychological safety of being able to speak up. One of the things that we've noticed in the survey results and the verbatims that we get in some of the surveys through our Diversio dashboard tool is that employees really are expecting more than just the legal minimums. They are trying to align their values and workplace values. And if there's a lack of alignment there, you can really start to see retention challenges. So one of the things that employees expect is an alignment between what organizations say and how they behave. So, for example, if a company claims to support well-being, but it only provides that unpaid sick leave that's required by law, and also rewards perfect attendance, employees start to see that contradiction. So discouraging necessary sick time, leading to burnout, dissatisfaction, and higher turnover. That lack of alignment with expectations. It also highlights, that example specifically, highlights one of the areas of opportunity for leaders, and that is recognizing that disconnect that sometimes happens. So I saw an example of this recently in Ontario. And Daniel, I think there's a couple of countries in Europe that are implementing things like right to disconnect and protecting employees' personal time out of the office. So a company may talk about promoting work-life balance, but still reward employees who work after hours. And even if they have that legislated right to disconnect policy, it's kind of meaningless if managers are still calling people outside of working hours. And employees start to lose trust with that disconnect, and those initiatives become really ineffective. And once again, you get that disengagement and turnover.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So I think if what I surmise is that the bottom line is while compliance sets the foundation from a legal perspective, it's not enough in isolation to build a thriving workplace. Just because company A follows the law doesn't mean employees feel supported.
Yeah.
Next slide, please, Apuba. So let's shift the conversation. I think we've spoken really about the importance of compliance, but also highlighted that compliance cannot work in isolation. Let's talk about what an inclusive culture looks like and how it creates a workplace where employees don't just stay, but they thrive and they enjoy what they're doing. I think this is what we do as a business since 2019 across 50 countries every single day. We help organizations build and sustain an inclusive culture because we know, and we have terabytes and terabytes of data to have the results that prove inclusive cultures have incredibly positive business outcomes. If we look at the three key pillars here: equity, fair access and opportunities for all; trust, safe to speak up, share ideas and challenge the norms and the status quo; and also engagement. Leaders, as we spoke about previously, champion it, and employees actively participate in it. So equity and fairness, it's in the title. It ensures equal opportunity, equal access for resources, opportunities and advancement. So we look at fair hiring, promotions, pay equity. We look at transparent policies that prevent bias, and also consistent accountability for all employees, psychological safety and trust, creating a workplace, both maybe online and also in person, where employees feel safe to speak up, to share ideas and challenge those norms and status quos without fear. This can include, but really isn't limited to, leaders modeling trust and radical transparency and accountability, encouraging, fostering open, honest feedback, and acting on employees' concerns, not just listening. And then with engagement and leadership and employee engagement, true momentum driving and sustainable and intentional inclusion happens when leaders champion it and employees actively participate. Leaders set the tone through their actions, not just their words. Employees' voice in decision-making, whether that's surveys, ERGs, and feedback loops, and also ongoing learning and adaptability to evolving workplace needs. As Sakina alluded to before, this really is the fundamental basis of what Diversio does in terms of the people and data survey and the data collections, the analysis, to then play back to you all of these key areas in your business where you're working well in terms of inclusive culture, but potentially some areas of intervention, could be flexible working, sexual harassment in the workplace, where we can help you, and particularly Sakina's team from Diversio EDU can help support through training, education, and consultancies. So again, I feel like I'm the theory person and you're the practice. Do you want to take us on to sort of more practical elements, Sakina?
Yeah, sure. I actually chose to I chose three policies that I think a lot of organizations identify with. Someone in your organization is going to get sick at some point. As your organization grows, there's going to be opportunities for more and more religious or cultural accommodations being needed. And with any luck, your organization is going to grow in their extended family as well through maternity or parental leave. So these three areas are examples where we can look at compliance, setting the baseline. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what organizations could do if they had the opportunity to go further to foster that culture of inclusion. So we'll start by looking at what it means to simply meet compliance, and then explore some practices and small shifts in policies that can have big impacts on what Daniel just talked about: employee trust, that sense of belonging, and really building that overall workplace culture. So let's dive into sick leave. So obviously, people are going to get sick, and most countries have some level of legally required sick leave, but it can really vary widely. So here in Alberta, employees are legally entitled to 5 unpaid sick days per year, but in Ontario, they're entitled to 3 unpaid job protected sick days. Daniel, what does sick time look like in the UK? I'm sorry, I'm unfamiliar with it. I'm talking periodic sick time, like a day or two, not like surgery or something serious.
I suppose if we reverse back a little bit, I think truly inclusive sick pay leave policy prioritizes, to your point, employee well-being, reducing stigma and ensuring fairness. There's paid sick leave for all employees. A number of different companies will provide our employees, including hourly staff, with paid sick day from day one. Looking to mental health days as part of sick leave as an example. We know that quite a large number of organizations are starting to truly introduce that, and also have a little bit of flexibility and I hate the word, non-penalty sick leave policies. It's no one means to be ill, or whether it's physical or mental as well, but reducing these punitive measures like attendance bonuses tied to perfect attendance, which sort of discourages employees from taking time off. I'm staggered that's still in place. Offer flexibility, so allow employees to take partial sick days instead of requiring full days off. Train managers to reinforce a stay home when sick culture to prevent presentism, sort of working while ill, and publicly encourage employees to use sick time without guilt. We know that in one of the companies local to me in London, Adobe provides unlimited sick leave with no tracking or penalties. I know
Awesome.
that our CEO, Laura, instigated this years ago as well, and also have unlimited paid time off.
Yeah, and in addition, I've heard one of your former employers, Microsoft, expanded its paid leave to cover additional caregiving responsibilities, like being able to use your sick time to care for family members like children or elderly parents or partners, recognizing that there's a burden to family illnesses. Also, some of the ways that employers could help reduce the duration of some leave is to offer remote work as an alternative. So I had a friend who had to take time off for knee surgery. She wasn't going to be able to drive. She couldn't go to work, but long before working from home became a thing, her employer actually allowed her to work remotely, which meant she didn't have to be away from work as long. And you also want to ensure that employees are not pressured to work until they've actually fully recovered.
Yeah, 100%. Sakina, do you want to, on to the next slide, do you want to talk a little bit about religious and cultural accommodations?
Awesome. With Ramadan right around the corner, this is a great time to talk about that. And we can give some practical examples that employers could implement today, even. So, employers across Canada, the US, and the UK are all legally required to accommodate religious beliefs and practices unless it causes undue hardship. That's the compliance side of things. And most workplaces allow employees to request time off for religious observances using either unpaid leave, their vacation time, banked overtime. And that meets legal requirements, but it doesn't necessarily foster that culture or that sense of inclusion. And even when employers' intention is to create inclusion, it can sometimes fall flat. Like one of my clients who had great intentions organizing a multicultural potluck but scheduled it during Ramadan when many Muslim employees fast from dawn to sunset. So, because this planning team lacked diverse perspectives, they overlooked this key consideration, unintentionally including a pretty significant portion of their workforce. So, when looking at creating more inclusive workplace cultures, specifically around religious and cultural accommodation, my first suggestion would be design meeting times and events with religious observances in mind. So, like avoiding scheduling team lunches or potlucks during Ramadan. Along with that, also take into account dietary restrictions of various religious and cultural backgrounds. But even broader than that, ensuring that you have vegetarian dishes can really help make your workplace more inclusive. So halal, kosher, vegetarian, other dietary restrictions. Flexible scheduling. So this can be adjusting work hours to accommodate fasting or prayer for certain religious holidays, Ramadan, Yom Kippur, Diwali. Offering floating days off or flex days. So some companies provide additional paid or even unpaid days off to accommodate religious observances. Some workplaces have dedicated spaces for prayer or meditation, or even just reflection or quiet rooms for certain employees who might need just a little bit of decompression or alone time. These are they used to be sick rooms, which it doesn't have to be anymore, where you have an actual bed to lie down. It could just be a quiet space. Looking at policies to allow for religious attire like hijabs, turbans, kippot, providing training for managers on what religious and cultural accommodations are and some of the best practices, as well as just having a clearly written, well articulated, well communicated, well understood accommodation policy. So employees know what their rights are and how to request adjustments, making accommodation requests simple and confidential and judgment free.
Uh,
So I want to move on now to an area that both Daniel and I have a little bit of background in, and that is maternity and parental leave and how organizations can move beyond compliance. So Canada, the US, and the UK all offer legally mandated parental leave based on government requirements. Canada has significantly more protected leave. I think we're up to 18 months now, job protected. And both Canada and the UK offer partial payment through government programs, whereas the US, through the Family and Medical Leave Act, they do have protected leave, but it is unpaid. However, certain states, like New York, has top ups or partially paid leaves. So before we dive into inclusive practices here, I've gone slightly off script, so I might toss some of this back over to Daniel. But I do want to point out that some of these suggestions are more in line for larger organizations, but we do have one or two ideas for smaller organizations. Daniel, do you want to jump in here and kind of walk us through some of the inclusive practices for maternity, parental, and caregiver
yeah, I think
options?
to sort of summarize what you just said, I think it's really important that all parents are supported equally. So companies can review and potentially should be making policies gender neutral or encourage non-birth parents to take leave. So as an example, Deloitte named its policy family leave to ensure fathers and same-sex parents feel included. I think included and inclusion is a theme that's running through today. Expand caregiving benefits. This is probably another one maybe for more larger organizations, so including paid leave for caring for aging parents, partners, or children with special needs. Example, Microsoft expanded its leave policies to support all caregivers, not just parents.
Daniel, you know what I really wanted to talk about, and this came up recently for me. I had a member of my team return from maternity leave, and one of her suggestions was, I almost feel like I need a re-onboarding. I feel like I'm joining a totally new organization. And, my role has changed, the team has changed. So some of these return to work options, any organization could really look at how to do that better, whether it's through a gradual return or hybrid work, sometimes a part-time schedule for a period of time. That can also help with daycare or childcare handoffs. I don't know about you, Daniel, but when I dropped my kid off the first time to daycare, it was an absolute nightmare and a little bit traumatizing for both of us. And just getting into that new routine, having some flexibility can help. That really talks to that building a culture of support, training managers how to support people and recognizing that caregiving is a priority of the workplace, not just of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Which takes us on to our next slide. Who are the key architects, the key components of this, and it's really the role of HR and leadership in this cultural transformation. We've sort of demonstrated how bridging compliance to culture requires intentional effort, and it doesn't happen in isolation. HR and leadership do play a critical role in turning policies into practice, embedding inclusion for everyday behaviors, decision making, and workplace dynamics. In the final section, we'll explore how HR can drive meaningful change and how leadership sets the tone for a truly inclusive culture. Sakina, given your background as an inclusive leader and specifically in HR, why don't you kick us off?
Great. Thanks, Daniel. So, HR is no longer just about enforcing policies. That was a little bit of my introduction back in the day. We've evolved into change agents, really working to shape workplace culture by aligning the people strategy with business goals. You can't have them separated. And we do that by leveraging data like that, which we collect here at Diversio, and looking at policies and training in order to drive inclusion through the organization, as well as engagement at every level. So we're fortunate that a lot of transactional tasks that we used to do manually are now able to be automated, which gives us in HR a chance to focus on some of that higher impact initiatives. The people analytics industry, of which we are proud to be a part, which includes things like engagement surveys, offer us real-time insights to who we have and how those people feel, and gives us a leg up in addressing some of the cultural gaps proactively. And that allows us to take that and really weave it into the policies that we're creating. So going beyond compliance, where we look at how do I manage the fact that I've got employees in two jurisdictions with two widely different employment standards, with different holidays, with different leave policies, and how do I really make it a cohesive, equitable lived experience across the board, and taking into account flexible policies that allow us to bend and shift with these different requirements while creating psychological safety. And ensuring that it's not just that checkbox of, yeah, but we met requirements, and really taking it farther. Because that leads into engagement, which involves partnering, as Daniel said earlier, with both leaders and employees. So you have to have leaders modeling the behaviors and employees actively engaged and willing participants in the change movement. And so HR does this by driving the accountability throughout the organization. And we do that through acting upon the employee feedback we receive in pulse surveys, in Diversio surveys, through ERGs and inclusion councils, and really capturing that and then finding a way to report back. And that's part of the measuring and sustaining cultural transformation. So it's not enough just to collect all this data, but we have to actually report back what we're doing with it and create KPIs and metrics that we hold ourselves and leaders accountable for. So looking at those inclusion, engagement, belonging indexes and scores, and seeing them hopefully improve over time, and doing that by sustainable initiatives like ongoing behavioral training, as well as reinforcing the cultural change long term. But there's also a really big role that leaders need to play. Daniel, why don't you dig into that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership's influence. Leadership sets the tone for your workplace culture. What leaders prioritize, employees will invariably follow. What senior leaders actively champion, and when they champion inclusion, it does foster psychological safety, engagement, and that keyword again, innovation, making inclusion a core part of the organization rather than just being a compliance exercise or tick box. We know that accountability drives real change. What gets measured, I haven't said this many times, gets managed, but it's incredibly accurate in every sense of the word. Leaders themselves must be held accountable for inclusion goals through KPIs, performance reviews, and engagement metrics. Companies with clear and transparent accountability structures see more sustainable cultural transformation. Transparency builds trust. Employees need to see real progress and inclusion efforts, and leaders should and can communicate openly about success, challenges, acknowledge gaps, and involve employees in solutions, creating a much stronger buy-in and credibility. I think transparency and communication really is key, having that reinforcement learning. You talked about doing engagement, employee gap, pulse surveys. I'm participating. I'm trying to give back all of my sense of my experience, my lived experience in my day, both in my workplace, but also sort of, myself. If I see no results off the back of that, if I get new communications from HR or people in culture, if there's no momentum in sort of that communication, then it's very hard to continue to maintain my trust and also get me to actively participate. We talk about companies, they talk about fatigue and they talk about inertia. Invariably, the companies that don't talk to diversity about that have got an incredible communication strategy, marketing, people and culture, HR, and they're constantly working with all of their leaders and their employees to drive innovation, but really importantly, communicate change, having identified areas of intervention within companies where employees have really, really put their hand up and said, we need support, we need help in those areas. That also works with leaders as active participants, not just being the sponsors. Inclusion isn't top down. In terms of the directives, leaders must engage themselves in training and mentor diverse talent, but also advocate for equitable opportunities. I think we've heard it a few times, Kina. I don't have time for this. I've got too many emails to answer. I'm far too busy. This is one of the most critical things that leaders can do in terms of their own leadership styles. So it's really important that they're not just sponsors, but active participants. And comes back to continuous learning and adaptation. So inclusive leadership, like all inclusion, is an ongoing journey. It's a process. It's never done. It's not a one and done, as you folks like to say over in Canada as well. It's a continuous journey of learning. And also with learning comes an openness to feedback and an openness and an ability and a willingness to change. Organizations that do encourage the growth mindset in leadership are much more resilient, innovative, and able to attract and, really importantly, retain top talent. Leaders shouldn't just set the policies. They should always be thinking about the culture as well. Next slide, please. Just before we dig into this one, Sakina, if anybody has any questions, any challenges, anything they're wanting to focus on, please drop your questions into the QA. We've just got the last slide coming up now, so please don't be shy. Ask us anything. This is very much a safe space, and we'll do our level best to provide the answers. Practical tips. Sakina, were you going to kick this one off?
Great. Sure. Thanks. So moving beyond compliance means embedding people, purpose, and inclusion into every aspect of the workplace culture, not just policies, but the daily behaviors and those, as Daniel was just talking about, the leadership actions. So here's how to make that shift. We do recommend that you gather some data to help you diagnose the culture and then set some goals against that. So you can do this through culture audits. Lots of organizations have requirements around pay equity reviews. Many organizations conduct employee engagement surveys, and these will help you identify some gaps. From that, set those clear, measurable goals and tie it to your business priorities. Don't leave it off in its corner floating around, because that's how initiatives get chopped when money dries up. Look at creating policies that go beyond those legal requirements. Yes, you can offer 5 unpaid days off in Alberta and 3 unpaid days off in Ontario, but your ability to provide a similar experience for all your employees, regardless of where they live and work, is really going to help build that equitable foundation and build that trust. And look at supporting all employees. One of the points that Daniel made when he was talking about sick leave was looking at your policies. Does it cover full-time, part-time, and even contract workers? So that's what we mean. Ensure that those policies are transparent, equitable, and consistently applied. Again, full-time, part-time, contract staff, union, non-union, Canada, US, UK. What are the ways that you can create more equitable experiences across the board? Empower those employees, give them a voice, whether it's through inclusion councils, ERGs, pulse surveys, or any sort of regular feedback loops. And then report back on it. And that helps foster that culture of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable raising concerns and sharing ideas. That leadership accountability, we can't talk enough about that. You can't have a right to disconnect policy and then call people at home at 10 o'clock at night. Leaders who actively champion inclusion by incorporating it into their own performance evaluations and those of their direct reports, as well as into those business goals and the goals that get reported out publicly through annual reports to the board and to employees. Get visible. That's one of the big things for leaders. And finally, you can sustain cultural change through continuous learning and, as Daniel said, adaptation, that growth mindset, and being willing and open to hear the feedback from those employees and go, we might have missed the mark. Maybe we got to shift. Maybe we've got to pivot. Maybe we need to develop further. And finally, as Daniel mentioned earlier, the laws are evolving. There's a lot of stuff coming up in the UK, Daniel, in the next couple of years that are coming into play. And you're going to have to look at what your organization is doing to prepare for some of those changes and how you're going to be able to equitably roll them out. And that doesn't necessarily mean day one, but how might you do it over a staggered or staged time frame? So that is the formal portion of the presentation, but we would love to open the floor up to some of your questions. Apurva, what do we have from our participants today?
So I'm sorry, that's clearly not Apurva.
You've got one already. Great.
Our organization is about to launch it's semantic, isn't it? EDI implementation. Do we mind EDI, DEI? Does it matter to employees? Is it an acronym? Anyway, about to launch the implementation. What do you suggest senior leadership, what do you think their key messaging should consist of? So maybe I'll have a quick run at that, and I'm sure you can more than top and tail. I suppose the why, it's the Simon Sinek, isn't it? The why, the what, and the how, but what's the vision and the strategic importance for companies, why this matters, how it aligns maybe with the organization's long-term strategy, and then really looking about the impact, highlight how it will streamline operations, improve accuracy, and enhance sort of partnerships with employees, maybe customers, maybe vendors as well. It's always critical to talk about the benefits to the stakeholders, whether that's employees, whether that's customers and partners, and for the organization. Leadership's commitment, I think there's been a consistent theme throughout today. that it's really important that leadership don't just set, they actually participate and they prioritize as well. So that might mean budgets, that might mean resources, additional people, or potentially some sort of change management happening in the business. And then ultimately the call to action, what's next, what's the communication plan as well. So I think those key elements, number one, vision and strategic importance, benefit to stakeholders, what is the leadership commitment, and then what's going to happen next, and how often should you expect as an employee, what's going to be the regularity of the cadence, and ultimately how would we like you to participate in terms of the D&I or EDI implementation across the business. Sakina, any additions to that?
That is a fantastic overview of what an organization should do to launch or implement EDI in the workplace. I do like to tie back, you said vision and strategy of the organization. I like to dial it back even further to what started you thinking about doing this. So if there was some data or something, again, back to the Simon Sinek, start with the why. Why are we doing this? And how can you be involved? I love your suggestion, Daniel, about what to expect moving forward, when to expect it, and how can I participate? So I think I just reinforced you. Great job. Next question.
Next question. It was around any specific examples in the UK where a company's moved from compliance, as we've done over the course of the webinar, to culture where it's been successful. I put a link in the chat to the Parker Review, and the mandatory gender pay reporting has pushed a lot, if not all, organizations to focus on representation. And only because we work with them quite closely, we wanted to focus on the Unilever and their inclusive leadership. Their focus, or their leadership's focus, which is continually communicated, is broken down. I think it's 5 or 6 different elements. One was about diverse representation, so striving for balanced representation across all leadership levels, including gender, race, ethnicity, and other underrepresented groups. Leadership training, which we deliver every day globally. It really enables and it equips leaders with the skills to value and understand diversity, foster and enable and facilitate psychological safety, and advocate for equity through dedicated inclusive leadership programs, which Sakina's incredible team deliver every day. They also focus on addressing bias, so implementing and reviewing policies and practices to identify and eliminate bias in recruitment, promotion, and decision-making process. And addressing bias, a lot of those courses will, rightly or wrongly, focus on managers and also hiring managers, because often they're very much at the front. And when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to interviewing, when it comes to assessing promotion, and also making those critical decision making. Accountability, being privately and publicly held accountable for creating inclusive teams and also promoting diversity within the departments. That doesn't mean targets, it just means about accountability. And also building representation across your brand, and also across external partnerships, and also potentially the supply chain. And you can read more about that in the link that I sent on the Parker Review. And that was the last question that we had. We could be very generous, Sakina, and give you and the other folks 8 minutes back in your day. We super appreciate. We're very thankful for people to make the time. Thank you to Sakina for getting up a little bit earlier this morning. We also appreciate you doing that as well. You can reach both me or Sakina on LinkedIn, or you can drop me an email at danielfellows@diversio.com if you have got any more questions, or you want to just have a chat. And we're delighted to continue to support and partner with a lot of our clients and partners to help them. The sun is shining in London, so I bid you all a fond farewell, and look forward to seeing you next time.